an uncomfortable silence. We have all definitely experienced them. They are pervasive, and they come about for so many different reasons. Sometimes an uncomfortable silence is the result of you having said exactly the wrong thing. The conversation just comes screeching to an awkward halt as you try desperately to take your words back, but there's just no hope of doing that. And occasionally, an uncomfortable silence is the product of not knowing what to say, as in the time that a stranger might divulge something inappropriately intimate with you. Oh, I have irritable bowel syndrome. Your mouth just falls open. You want to say something, but there's really no script for that. You've just gone so far off the rails, the moment just hangs between you. And occasionally, an uncomfortable silence is the result of ambiguity. It's marked by confusion. This idea that you're not sure what's happening, as in the case of a speaker coming out on stage and failing to perform his primary mandate, speaking. And sure, there's a little bit of nervous laughter, but as that moment extends, there is a little speeding of the heart, a little bit of worry that maybe there's a technical problem, maybe his microphone doesn't work, or more concerning still, what if he's truly forgotten what he's going to say? What if he has stage fright? What if he's paralyzed? Who's going to fix that? And I think that an uncomfortable silence is a wonderful illustration of the hues of discomfort. Discomfort, which exists on this wide palette that ranges from the physical, as in the case of being crammed into a hard, non-reclining seat on a long-haul commercial airline flight, to the social, as in the case of showing up to a party where you just don't know many people, to the emotional and psychological, as in the case of struggling to learn a new language, but feeling frustrated by your profound inability to wrap your tongue around these exotic new words. I think that discomfort and comfort are especially important pieces of the conversation and in the context of the pursuit of happiness. Since antiquity, leading intellectuals have argued, convincingly I believe, that pain and pleasure form two powerful motivations that underlie virtually every single human decision and human behavior. Now, at risk of simplifying things, I think that when we talk about pain and pleasure, two things that are hardwired into our brains, pain and pleasure, I essentially think that we are talking about discomfort and comfort. They may or may not be exactly synonymous with each other, but I think that they are conceptual cousins, if not conceptual siblings. And I think that it is timely to talk about comfort and discomfort because, and make no mistake, we live in an era of unprecedented comfort. I don't want to come across sounding like a jerk here or insensitive. I just want to recognize that, yes, I get that people live in refugee camps. People are afflicted by conditions of war and violence. I understand that there are people all over the world who live in dire conditions and poverty. So my comments here today are largely confined to the vast number of people who live in industrialized nations. Even many of the poorest citizens of industrialized nations have a surprising access to comfort. Just consider the access to have hot running water at will, absolutely anytime you want. Consider the ability to have electric lights 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. Just these two examples alone mean that typical, average, normal citizens of many countries essentially live better than did the kings and queens of old. If you add to those technological marvels, things like the ability to hop between continents in the span of a handful of hours via commercial airline travel, or instant digital global communication, those technologies are nothing short of miraculous. These technologies allow us to reach out into our circumstances, into our environment, whether it's our social environment, whether it's our physical environment, and actually take control of our surroundings in ways that we never have been able to previously. If you imagine our cave-dwelling forebears, my guess is they probably complained about the weather. It's really hot out here. And they sought refuge in the shade of a tree from the oppressive sun, or maybe they took a dip in the local river. We'll just follow that exact same impulse into the modern era. And we have air conditioning. With a flick of a switch, you can control the ambient temperature to the exact degree you want. As if that's not good enough, many newly manufactured automobiles have separate climate control systems for the driver and the passenger, as if sharing their air isn't comfortable enough. You need your own. I think yours is about 6 degrees too hot. I mean, it's absolutely amazing the ability we have to control the environment, to make it easier, less painful, more comfortable. But I believe that it's possible that we have too much comfort. I believe that as we increasingly succeed in our pursuit of comfort, it becomes the new normal. I believe that as comfort becomes the new normal, we get out of practice feeling uncomfortable and withstanding emotional discomfort, social discomfort. Case in point, I'm sure that you've been with a friend and your friend has gotten up to excuse him or herself before, walk off, and it's like this alarm goes off. I'm alone. And what do? If you own a smartphone, there is a powerful urge to pull it out. Because at your fingertips, you have social connection. At will, you have a huge range of instant entertainment options. It's as if we can vanquish all boredom and all loneliness with the help of technology. I think that's okay to some extent, but what if we take it too far? I think the place that you can most obviously see this is in the case of our children. I want to tell you that I am as much a culprit of this particular parenting strategy as any human on earth, so I'm not trying to wag a finger at you. But because we love the younger generation, our kids, so much, we dearly want the best for them, we protect them, we safeguard them in every possible way. We safeguard them in our playgrounds. It's as if we've gotten rid of all those old wooden playgrounds that I certainly grew up with because they had splinters, and we had to replace them with plastic playgrounds where splinters are no longer a possibility. Heaven forbid our children get splinters. We don't want our kids physically hurt. But it doesn't stop with physical pain. We don't want our kids bullied. We don't want our kids feeling left out. We don't want our kids confused. We don't want our kids to have low self-esteem. We essentially don't want anything bad to happen to our kids. That's understandable. I'm not here to argue that bad stuff should happen to children. But one of the ways that this has become manifest in modern society is the way that we parent children, especially around their emotions. Your kids, just like you, experience jealousy, irritation, boredom, frustration. When your kid comes to you with a worry, more often than not, you probably say, "Don't worry." When your kid comes to you and they're angry, You probably say, calm down. I think that it's strange that we try and talk the children, our kids, out of the emotional experiences that they have. That we try and distract them or get them to swap out anything that's even vaguely negative. It's as if we can't tolerate their negative emotions, and we're teaching them not to tolerate their negative emotions as well. I think collectively we have a tendency to send a quite explicit message to children that says, look, what you're feeling is invalid and inappropriate if it's a so-called negative emotion. And what I would like for you to do right this second is swap it out for something a bit more palatable. I want you to swap it out for positivity. Now, I do believe that positivity is a great thing to feel. I believe if you look at the research, people vastly experience positives. I think that they experience a predominance of positive emotion, in fact. They seem to report about 75-80% of the time they feel mildly pleasant. I think that's good, and I think that is what we should be shooting for. But you need the capacity to experience self-doubt and confusion and all these things. It's how learning occurs. It's how you face novelty. If you want to train your kids up to be adults who have the capacity to do things like commit to a life of marriage, take an overseas holiday, choose a major at university, move to a new city, they are going to have to develop the capacity to withstand negative emotional experiences. And I believe that when they do, they can experience a far richer life. In fact, a wonderful life, a life that does allow them to take risk, and a life that allows them to experience a bit of novelty. So I'm not here to argue that we take our smartphones and chuck them into the ocean, or that you go out and buy shoes that are 2 sizes too small so that you can permanently be uncomfortable, just to kind of like flex those pain muscles and really kind of build yourself up in that way. I don't think we need to do that, because life will already serve us a natural helping of hardship. We don't have to artificially manufacture it. We just have to realize that it's okay when life does it, because we're way, way tougher than we give ourselves credit. We don't have to distract ourselves. We don't have to whitewash it. We don't have to do positive reframing. We actually can just withstand negative emotion. I'd like to give you an example. I'd like to tell you a story from my own work life. When I'm not standing on stage talking to you, I travel the world and study happiness. A lot of people think that's a pretty good job to have. In fact, when I tell people, the most common question is, wait, how do I get that job? It wasn't advertised in the college brochure. Well, I want to tell you that more than anything, traveling the world and studying happiness is an uncomfortable job. It is a hard job. Case in point. About 10 years ago, I had the glorious opportunity to travel to Greenland, where I spent 6 months at the very top of Greenland working with traditional Inuit people who are engaged in a hunting and fishing lifestyle. I wanted to see about the happiness of people who lived in a very hostile environment in a very traditional way. I just wanted to find out from them, how happy are you? What makes you happy? Those types of things. So my Norwegian colleague, Joar, and I, we got in a tiny speedboat, and we threaded our way through an inland sea between huge department store-sized icebergs. And I'll tell you, I was nervous on the boat, because the person captaining the boat, he said, this water is so cold that if our boat capsizes on this rough sea, you're better to just start swimming for the bottom. And finally, we landed on the beach at Siarpaluk. It is the northernmost town in the world. It is literally the last place on earth. 125 Inuit living there. And we got off, and I hadn't really thought about this ahead of time, but there wasn't a chain grocery store selling local and organic foods. Never fear, though, because the Inuit said, oh no, there's definitely local and organic food here. You just have to hunt it yourself. And it was the first time, and only time in fact, that I've ever had to hunt for my own dinner. So Yoar and I, we trekked out of town and began the slow process in driving rain up a very, very steep mountainside. We threaded slowly so as not to twist our ankles up through these rocks, some of them tiny, some of them the size of houses, deposited there by glaciers thousands of years ago. And up this loose rock, we slowly, slowly climbed. I was out of breath. Higher and higher we went until we were about halfway up the mountain. And there, we laid down, hiding between two large boulders. And the rock was poking into my back. The rain was hitting my face. Ice was crusting my jacket. And there we waited. We were waiting for birds. We had these poles that were 3 meters long, at the end of which were huge nets. And we lied down so still. And before long, we heard the flapping of thousands of wings as flocks of birds drew in off the sea and came close, looking in the rocks, looking for bugs to eat. And as their wings darkened the sky above us, we would strain our cold muscles. We would try and get as much leverage as possible, and with these poles, swing them through the flock of birds, trying to grab a bird out of midair. Now, I don't know if you've ever grabbed a bird out of flight before. It's super duper hard. We didn't just fail at this once or twice or 5 times or 12 times. Yoar and I failed at this hour after hour, and it grew colder, and I grew hungrier. And I actually worried that perhaps for the first time in my privileged life, I would go without supper. But then eventually, Yoar and I, after several hours, we each caught a bird, and I was faced with something that I had not given any thought to. We had to kill the bird. And I found that I just couldn't do it. And Yoar, much tougher than me, he took this burden onto himself, and he killed both of these birds. And despite the fact that I couldn't bring myself to do it, that as a hunter I was essentially at least half a failure, I have to admit that I kind of felt this swell of pride, like, yeah, we got our dinner here. That's pretty cool. Yoar and I out here in the mountains, like men, these birds. And I felt as powerful as I've ever felt in my life. And with these birds in my hand, I walked victoriously off the mountainside and back into Siarpaluk. I don't know if it's because I'm American, but I just had this like triumphal music in my head, expecting that the Inuit would line up in some kind of like parade, to welcome me back. But that's not actually what happened. What happened is I got to the edge of town, and a hunter looked at me and actually pointed and laughed at my 2 birds. I was like, come on now, be nice. I'm essentially a tourist. Like, 2 birds has got to be okay, right? I mean, are the other tourists doing better than this? I said, guy, on your best day, how many birds did you catch? And he said, no, it's not a fair comparison. I said, your best day. He said, okay, on my best day, 770. And there was an awkward silence. And then we had to eat the birds. We had to eat their hearts and their intestines. That was gross. And if you think about this story, it is a story where I was too cold, I was too hungry, I was eating food that I thought was disgusting, I was embarrassed in front of someone I respected. I sort of tested my mettle and realized that I couldn't kill this bird, that I lacked the capacity to sort of rise to that occasion, if you will. That nearly every single aspect of this story is one of discomfort, which is so interesting because I count this day among the best days I've ever had. One of the most novel days I've ever had, one of the most challenging days I've ever had, one of the most rewarding days I've ever had. And the only reason I get to have a day like that is because I know fundamentally I can withstand disgust and embarrassment and all of these other negative emotional experiences. And I think that's what we ought to be teaching our kids. You're disappointed. That's a totally appropriate reaction to your circumstance right now. You're frustrated. Yeah, I can understand. You're angry. I'd probably be angry if I were in your shoes too. There you go. You can withstand it. That's what we should tell our kids. And I think that helps us face all the ambiguous situations, all the awkward silences and the stuff you can't exactly figure out. I think that's what you should be reminding yourself, for yourself, that you can withstand these negative emotions. It's what makes life worth living in part. I think that if you can remember this one simple fact, then I think that you...
If you go to this supermarket and shouting, I want to buy peace of mind, then people laughing, or people feel that person's mind is something wrong.
Now, this word connections is a really interesting one because our kids today are more connected than ever.
Of course, then when you're in an institution, people call you up. They tell you to perk up. Yeah, perk up, because I didn't think of that.
I should have a happiness project, I decided. As soon as I have some free time, I'm going to do that.